Now that we know more about early language learning, we're going to look at specific ways to facilitate that acquisition of language and particularly ways to scaffold vocabulary development. Once again, I'm going to reference the Hart and Risley study that was done back in 1995. This study has been extremely influential in helping us understand what kind of interactions promote language acquisition. This was the study that documented how different socioeconomic groups communicated with their children. It was based on the observation that children from higher socioeconomic groups came to school with higher levels of oral language development than those children who came from minority groups or lower socioeconomic groups. They wanted to find out what made that difference. Well, what they discovered is that it was in the way they communicated with their children. Parents from higher socioeconomic groups used almost 4 times the number of words per hour in their everyday interaction with their children. These results may be shocking to you, but please remember they're only averages. There were families within the lower socioeconomic groups and minority groups that spoke just as much to their children as those upper middle class and higher socioeconomic group families did. Also, there were people in the high socioeconomic group who spoke just as little or even less than some of the families in the lower group. The really important thing to remember is that how we speak to children and how we engage them in conversation makes a huge difference. It shows up in their language acquisition levels when they start school, and it makes a difference in their verbal IQ abilities by the time they're in 3rd grade. Here's a simple example of conversations that may give you a better understanding of how the number of words per hour could vary so much across different households. Again, most people have great difficulty believing that there can be that much difference between the ways families talk to their children. But I bet if you watch carefully at a restaurant or at a grocery store or when children are playing outside, you will notice that there are some significant differences in the ways that parents communicate with their children. What is really sad is that talk costs nothing, and it is priceless to the child's developing brain. So again, it's important to help parents realize how vital it is to actually talk to their child, to narrate what they're doing, to talk about what they're seeing, to ask questions, to label colors, sizes, shapes, point to print. All these things are ways to encourage language development and are critically important to a child's developing brain. Notice in this simple conversation, Grandma is saying to Selena, "Hey, Grandma's going to wash the laundry. Be a big girl and help me find all the socks on the floor." And Selena, who's talking but just barely, follows her grandma around the house and picks up several socks from the floor. And she said, "Back socks?" "Yes," and that is referring to the color black. "Can you find red socks?" And Selena shakes her head. "Ed socks?" "Yes." So again, a child doesn't have to respond with perfectly formed words. More important is, do they understand? Are they communicating? This grandma is reinforcing and giving miniature lessons every time she communicates with her granddaughter. Okay, here's another one. Mommy's saying, "Let's find Nicky's shoes and let's finish dressing him." And the 3-year-old says, "Here, Mom, here are Nicky's slip-slops." And the mommy said, "Do you mean his flip-flops?" And Lauren was frowning. "Why do you call them that?" And Mommy said, "Well, when you walk in these shoes, they make a flip-flop, flip flop noise. Children sometimes, and of course Lauren calls them slip-slops to this very day, create their own words for things, and you know what? That's just fine too. Family language is critical. It is the place for the child to learn to use languages in the home. And again, they can learn one language or two or three languages, depending on who is talking to them. It is important for a family to know that they need to accept their child's language and respond using appropriate words and phrases. You know, I get concerned when I see a parent scolding a child for not saying something correctly. Like maybe a little girl will say, "We holded the rabbit," instead of "we held the rabbit." Well, a child will probably not go to kindergarten saying "we holded the rabbit," but even if they do, the teacher, an informed teacher, can shape that language by saying, "Yes, we held the rabbit." That kind of gentle support, that guidance, or scaffolding if you'd like, is the way that we shape a child's language. Scolding and reinforcing a child to repeat it correctly usually only reinforces the inappropriate language. What we also want you to do to encourage parents is to read to their children. Reading is where we find creatures like giraffes and elephants and spaceships and monsters and dinosaurs walking across the pages. It's the perfect opportunity for us to label things that we don't necessarily have in our lives or see frequently or regularly in the home. However, we also don't want to diminish the opportunities to watch television with children. There are incredibly good television shows out there, Discovery shows and Sesame Street. Once again, these can become opportunities to sit with children and to interact with them as they listen to and reinforce the information that's being shared on the screen. Okay, now let's switch to classroom talk. Here's a transcript of a recorded classroom conversation. Give you a chance to read it. Okay. Clearly, Manuel has a lot of experience with building bricks and using cement. So is he wrong? Or is he right? Or how else could the teacher have responded? In many classrooms, what we often see is a way of communicating with children that's called IRE. The teacher initiates a question, I. The children respond, R. And the teacher evaluates the answer based on whether it is right or wrong. That's the E part. You know, one would think that IRE would encourage talking in the classroom, but research tells us that it does not. Let's look at another approach to talking in a classroom with children called reciprocal discussion. Take a minute to read this transcript. Notice how much talk the child is doing in this conversation, at least as much, if not more, than the teacher. The teacher is asking real questions and responding in a real manner to the child, and she expects the child to be capable of conversing with interesting things. This is the kind of conversation that provides children with opportunities to truly express themselves and not to answer with just one word, like yes or no, or whatever. It offers the opportunity for children to express different points of view. Correctness is not the critical issue here. It is the talk that is important. If we want children to start thinking for themselves, we need to start them thinking for themselves very early in their classroom careers. Okay, so in the IRE example, the teacher was asking what we call closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions usually allow for only one right answer, and they're very factual. In contrast, open-ended questions lead to genuine interpretation and respect many different answers that could be correct. Let's take a look at this one. Do you think Goldilocks is a good person? Well, I asked that to a group of 5-year-olds, and I had one little boy in the back think for a second and then raise his hand. Then he said, well, you know, I think she probably was a good person, but she had a big problem. You know, I think her problem was that she was a kleptomaniac. Then the other 5-year-olds looked at him and said, kleptomaniac? What a great vocabulary lesson we had that day. Contrast that experience to this very simple question. What did Goldilocks do to Baby Bear's chair? Not only is this question totally inappropriate, but it has only one right answer. Well, actually, it's not that it is inappropriate, but it only has one right answer. So it is important for teachers to, of course, check for facts and ask closed-ended questions sometimes, but we need to encourage thinking and personal interpretation of the story. So what are some effective ways that we can structure our classroom so children are engaged in this kind of communication? Well, have you ever done show and tell or share and tell? I used to call it drag and brag. Often what would happen is the child just stands there with the objects and smiles at the audience. It's so frustrating. And guess what? It does not increase vocabulary. One child is in control of 24 children who are probably bored, and it's difficult for the child who is sharing to give information, to engage others in that kind of reciprocal learning that's so important. So research has helped us understand a better way to do that. If we have multiple sharing groups with less numbers in the audience, children use much more language, they listen more carefully, and they build upon each other's ideas. So instead of having one child sharing with 23, have 6 groups of 4 going on simultaneously. Of course, to get to that point, you would have to model within a large group to help children get ideas for questioning techniques, such as, where did you get this? When do you play with it? What is it used for? Why do you like it? Would you give it to somebody else as a gift? Those kinds of questions, if we teach children to ask open-ended questions, they scaffold the conversation. In a small group, they don't have to wait very long, and it's hard to wait your turn. Everyone has a chance to talk, and it creates an earnest, reciprocal environment. I've given you the reference here for the Hart and Risley study in case you would like to read the full details.